Welcome back, everyone. I am Dracoya with Avant Art and Scale 75 USA, and we have Matt the Pickled Dragon. Welcome back to another Unscripted with us. And cheers. What are we drinking today, Matt?
I'm back with the Bullet Frontier whiskey.
You really like that stuff. It must be good. I gotta try this out. I'm Bloody Marying today because, why not?
That's right. Why not? There's always room for a Bloody Mary. It's the Jello of drinks.
It's the Jello of drinks. I've never heard
Right.
that.
It's the gelatinous cube of drinks.
It's delicious. It fits with everything. Come on, brunch, lunch, dinner, whatever. So today we're going to be talking about traveling in D&D. We're going to talk to you about how to make your travel in D&D a little more interesting, a little bit more diverse. And we want to start talking to you today about something that Matt has introduced me to called Hex Crawls. Hex Crawls are a type of Matt. Matt, why don't you go ahead and take over? How would you best describe a hex crawl?
Well, Hex Crawl is kind of a old first edition concept where the party is handed a map, essentially a blank slate. Maybe there's a few hexes, which might represent a certain area of the map, of the overall area. And the rest of it's blank, and they essentially explore the island or explore the mountain range or explore the little area that they're in and map as they go along. It's a very interactive way of exploring and traveling from point A to point B, because it's the act of the players using their cartography skills and mapping. It's sort of like mapping a dungeon but overland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the hex gives a structure in such that it allows the players to, okay, well, this hex is a jungle hex, so they're going to draw whatever their jungle icon is, and maybe they could put, designate a little number if there's something awful or spectacular that happened in there, and then they can track it on a little chart on the side. But in any case, I'm rambling because that's what I do. But that's kind of your overview.
So one of the first things that, Matt, you had mentioned to me is that when you're creating your hex map, every single area is a different hexagon. And you got to figure out how many miles each hexagon is. So one hexagon can be a forest, a mountain, an ocean, a desert, so forth, so on. But how many miles is this one little hexagon? So it depends on how giant you want your map to be. You can have each hexagon be 1 mile. You could have each hexagon be 10 miles. And then you need to figure out, your travel rate with your party and how long it's going to take them to go through this hex crawl. Because while it sounds like a great time, most players are not going to be satisfied just doing this one hex crawl for the next 12 sessions. So, and then something else you just now mentioned was, different encounters for players in different areas in the map. So it's going to take a little bit of effort on the part of the DM. But if you put in all this effort and your players will just have so much more to do and so many more encounters.
Yeah, there are a number of different ways of doing a hex crawl. Now, they kind of fell out of favor, but in recent years, I've seen more and more people bringing them back and using them again. But it does take effort on the part of the DM to do a hex crawl. And, I hate to use the word properly because there's no one right way, but to make it really engaging and fun. So if you have a canned adventure, there might be designated encounters around your area that the players are scripted to encounter should they hit that proper hex. But as a DM, you're going to want to create, a dozen or so more canned ones to throw out there in the appropriate time, and they could be inserted anywhere. So maybe if they hit a hill hex, you have a tribe of Neanderthals come storming out, or they encounter the village, or but you prepare that information ahead of time, and you have it just prepared on the side, and you don't necessarily have to have it designated for a particular hex. You could just use it because you're not going to know where the players go.
Right.
Now,
the other benefit to having a hex is that if you create a whole list of encounters and your players don't encounter every single one, great. As a DM, you can just take all that work and put it into the next hex crawl.
Yeah, for sure. And, but before we keep going, we have to check out our stalwart adventurers are dividing up. The word from our sponsor. Thank you, Thorum.
I'll just take the Thorm ring. Thank you very much.
Oh, like hell you will. You can have this, take the Venom Dagger. I'll take the Thorm ring.
Venom Dagger? What am I? Well, actually, that could be useful. No, wait, I'm taking the Thorm ring.
Over my dead body? I can't
believe you would even over your dead body. That could be a ring. I'm going to take this dagger and I'm going to shove it up your...
My ring.
Whether you are looking for truly unique rings to exchange on your wedding day, or simply a statement piece for Renaissance fair or cosplay, look no further than Thorum. Rings fit for the gods. Use promo code PICKLED for 20% off your order. Anyway,
I do want to share one of the most famous hex crawls. Now, the Isle of Dread is an old first edition module. It was an introductory module for the basic Dungeons and Dragons, and it was meant for really low level party, and it was supposed to be kind of like a King Kong Skull Island sort of thing. But you can see in the back here, this is the this is the reboot by Goodman Games. So what they did was. And I'll share it on the screen here so you guys can see better. But what Goodman Games did is they took the module, which was originally only like 30 pages or 40 pages, and they updated it for 5e, and they did a lot of work for DMs. So they added a horde of encounters, tons of charts for random encounters. So you can see here, if it says here, main island south of the Central River, southwestern island. So if you're in that region of the map, you use this chart. And then there are charts for every different section of the island. So let me just share what we have
representation, here. Please.
And let's see, where is my little zoom button? There it is. Share. So you can see here, this is the map that's handed out to the players, and we can zoom in a little bit.
So it's very Fog of War, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, so if the players, so down here, there's some villagers, and think of the movie King Kong. There were like the real primitive people that they encounter, and then there was a giant wall that kept out all of the horrible creatures from Skull Island, including King Kong. And the Isle of Dread included that. There's a big wall here. Now, you can see the outskirts of the island is all mapped, and that's because an explorer did this work. They sailed around the island, and they mapped as they went. And the party ended up with this map. Now, if we scroll up to the Dungeon Master's map, we can see the completely filled out map. And you can see that there are numbers here. So if the party ends up in this region, we run encounter 12, or the plateau in the center is encounter 15, and so on. Now, this is an example of the original 1E module. So this is a PDF of that adventure. Now, if the interesting thing is, as a DM, as they're going through this hex crawl, if they're in a jungle hex, the party might be able to see adjoining hexes. So as they move forward, they should be able to see the adjoining hexes and kind of make a decision as to where to go as they climb.
This is so cool and incredibly helpful. I think it's more hands-on for the players. It gives them more stuff to do. It gives them more options. And you as a DM, you have to work a little bit to create your hex map, but honestly, it gives you a lot more freedom once the game has started. You don't have to work as hard on improvisation and figuring out what's going to happen next. Oh, this is lovely.
Yeah, and what you'll want to do too is something I did was I'll go out and I'll look for pictures and very, very interesting pictures of maybe mountainous jungles and use them as handouts. This is kind of what you see from these peaks. So if you were on this mountain hex, you'd be able to see pretty far for miles around, and you'd maybe give them a picture of this jungle stretched out with fog hanging above the trees, and the sun just creeping up over the skyline there.
So as you have your players continue forward, I mean, you don't have to have a different picture for every single hex. You can if you want. That sounds like too much work to me. But if you just have, 2 or 3 pictures that you can rotate through for every forest terrain or mountain terrain or desert terrain, and along with these pictures, Matt, I know we also discussed putting playlists out there for different terrains.
Yeah, so Spotify has a ton of gaming playlists out there. So there's one, I mean, and they're very specific, tavern playlists and jungle playlists, and and they really have very particular. I know there's one there out there for just exploration, cave exploration, dungeon exploration, but setting the mood during a hex crawl can, along with all of the visual aids, can really create the atmosphere and the immersion that is missing a lot of times from hex crawl, and why hex crawls kind of fell out of favor for the 90s, like 3rd edition, 4th edition. You didn't see them hardly at all because they were kind of monotonous if not run right. And with the internet, the DMs now have the tools to really make hex crawls truly immersive while the players are actively mapping and trying to plot out their next move. You can hear the sound of drums in the distance. That might be the Neanderthal village going nuts, or you thought you saw something in the clouds, a large winged shape, but you're not 100% sure. The Isle of Dread had black dragons, and I believe it even had a red dragon. So yeah, and I think there's also a green dragon. I think there were 3 different types of dragons here, and of course, like dinosaurs, T-Rexes, just a vast array of creatures. Goodman Games wasn't the first to reboot the Isle of Dread. 3rd edition had an Isle of Dread, but they didn't really do the hex crawl. They kind of scripted out how the party would go around the island, but the Savage Tide was a 3rd edition adventure that included the Isle of Dread. And they really scripted where the party would go. They were shipwrecked in places and kind of forced along a certain railroaded along certain paths in the Isle of Dread. Whereas the classic Isle of Dread and the Goodman Games reboot was a sandbox where you got to go wherever you wanted. It was really well done.
So one way to create this sense of movement and travel and participation from your group in D&D is to create a hex grid. The other one, even if you don't use a hex crawl, it's still a good idea to use things like visual aids, pictures for your different terrains, different types of music for your different terrains. And when you switch these things up as the session continues, it creates a sense of time and movement for your group. The other thing that we had discussed is doing weather charts and moon and sun charts. In a hex grid, I would assume you could probably say, in this little region, we're going to have a big thunderstorm. So if they swoop over here, it is big foresty, but there's going to be tons of thunder. And in the other way, maybe it'll be like a desert. And so, the desert is just excruciatingly hot during this time. And if they decide to go into a desert and decide to travel at night, to avoid this heat exhaustion, you could be able to track time using moon and sun charts and figuring out, what phase of the moon is going on. So if they travel at night in a desert, what phases that moon would actually help determine how far they're able to see in the dark, if assuming they don't have night vision.
Yeah, full moon, you're going to be able to see a lot better than like a waning moon, a waning gibbous moon. But and in some campaigns, the moon is a very spiritual thing. It's a very mystical thing, and you could have different effects or different creatures, like fey creatures that might be out during a new moon or a full moon that you wouldn't necessarily roll out at any other time. You can make those sorts of things significant. But you mentioned a word that most DMs don't use enough, and that's exhaustion. So I've heard of DMs, using damage to reflect, extreme cold or extreme heat. I've always used exhaustion. Exhaustion is one of those things that players are really scared of because hit point loss can be hand waved away with a heal. Just we're done with that. Give me a cure light wound or a cure light wounds. There's my old third edition coming out, but give me a healing potion and I'll be fine. But when you start layering on exhaustion, the only thing that's going to get rid of exhaustion are night's rest, like full night's rest. If you're out in the tundra and it's 30 below, you're not going to be resting comfortably and you're not going to be getting ready to that exhaustion. And if the exhaustion starts ramping up, at 6 exhaustion, you're dead.
Yes. So for the newer players out there, let me define the 6 levels of exhaustion. So on your first level of exhaustion, you get disadvantage on ability checks. On the second one, your speed is halved. The third one, you then get disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. Your fourth level of exhaustion, you get hit points maximum is now halved. On your 5th level, your speed is reduced to 0. And on your sixth level, it is death.
Yeah, so I've run plenty of Arctic campaigns. Well, I shouldn't say campaigns, but adventures, where the party has had to delve into extreme cold. And particularly at lower levels, the parties, they're not equipped to deal with extreme weather, and they're not equipped to deal with we're getting rid of exhaustion other than to rest it out. And it's hard to overcome exhaustion when you're out adventuring. So it's a good tool to represent the rigors of travel and make people really feel the twist of going on these long journeys and how just draining it is. Particularly, 5e is kind of players, it seems like every class has their own heal. Every class can cast spells. Every class has dark vision, or every race, it seems like more and more, it seems that way. But exhaustion is one of the things, one of the tools that DMs still have in their belt that can really put a hurt on players if you want to challenge them.
You can also take into consideration when your players are going on these long outside adventures, what is the climate? If they're going into a snowy climate, does it really make sense for them not to prepare? My last DM, when we went through a snowy terrain, he made sure that we all had ice boots and mountain climbing equipment and extra fuzzy blankets and things like that. And even then, we had a tiefling in our group, and I don't remember exactly why, but this tiefling did not do well in the cold at all. So for every 4 to 8 hours that she was out, she took a level of exhaustion, and she would regain it every single night because the rest of us were well equipped to help her deal with that. But pretty much the entire journey, she had at least one exhaustion point.
And, whenever I have my players going to extreme temperatures, I give them the opportunity to prepare, but I make sure that it's up to them. So the last time I took my party into the Arctic. I had one player who just kind of like, I don't know why, but he did not buy the gear. He just didn't do it.
He didn't take it seriously, which is fine.
Yeah, I mean, that was his choice. He just, I don't know if he thought the others would cover for him or whatever, but everyone loaded up on gear for them. And then when they got there, he was just like, well, I guess I forgot to do this, or I don't remember what his reason was, but he made it very hard on the others. I think right now he has, I don't know. I think he has 4 levels of exhaustion or something like that. I mean, he's hurting for certain.
Oh man, yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So, taking these things into consideration gives your players a sense of more realism. You have them prepare with their equipment. You have the pictures set up in the background. You have your playlist ready for them to listen to. Then they have a visual aid. They have a hearing. They also have now something that they have to physically do in the game. And all these things do combine to give it a much more realistic experience. Now, something else that you mentioned, Matt, when it came to long traveling adventures was the tiny hut and the mansion.
Yeah, the tiny hut and the magnificent mansion. Once they get a few levels under their belt, it really, like, the tiny hut means that they can rest comfortably every night, get rid of any, like, you get rid of 1 level exhaustion a night. So if they don't accumulate multiple levels, they'll be able to clear it by that night. Now, it's one of those, these are kind of the spells that I personally dislike, because it's just like, let's just give the players another feather in their cap to make things easy, because it really does kind of hand wave away kind of the rigors of travel when you have something like this. Now, they can be dispelled. The tiny hut is an opaque dome that you can't see through, and only allies can pass in or out. But that doesn't mean like a creature can't come along that has spellcasting ability and be like, oh, that's interesting. There's all this magic radiating over here. I'm gonna check this out, and maybe they spy on the party for a while. And
didn't you say you had a dragon that did just that to one of you?
Yeah, I had a white dragon. This was a higher level campaign. They were using a magnificent mansion, and he had been tailing the party for a while as they were traveling in the Arctic, and they were using the magnificent mansion at night. And finally, he watched them long enough, and he realized, these guys have quite a bit of treasure. But what this dragon wanted more than anything was somebody who was learned, who could catalog his hoard for him. So he waited till they were all resting in the mansion.
The dragon wanted an accountant.
Yeah. He waited until they were resting, middle of the night, and he dispelled and this is 3rd edition, so the dragon was able to cast spells, and he was really old. So he's got an array of abilities, and even though he's a white dragon, he's so old that his intelligence score is fairly high. And but he dispels the mansion and dumps the party out into the lawn. And long story short, one of the party members, a gnome wizard, volunteered in lieu of getting slaughtered by the dragon to serve the dragon for a year and a day, as essentially an accountant. You're right. And he rolled up a new character. They avoided the combat, and they went on with their day, their adventure. But yeah, I mean, these spells seem like they make the party invincible, but every once in a while, I think it's reasonable for a DM to say, somebody's going to take note of this magical signature here, and check out what this is all about.
Yeah.
I think
sorry, go on.
I was just saying, I think that's perfectly reasonable.
You also have the right as DM to just say, no, we're not allowing that particular spell or that particular feat in your game. That's always an option. And I find that a lot of DMs, especially newer DMs, they want to follow the rules to such a T that they don't want to ban certain things, but it's your game at the end of the day. And, 1 or 2 homebrew rules isn't going to make or break your game. You should do whatever makes your life easier as the DM.
Yeah, and speaking of feats, never forget that feats are an optional rule.
Yes.
They're listed as an optional rule. You don't have to use them in your game. You know, it's a little different to say we're not going to include the tiny hut or the magnificent mansion. It's a little different because they're not listed as optional rules, but you do have the right to craft your game. I in the past, and this kind of broaches our next subject, I in the past have outlawed teleportation spells.
Oh.
So I always wanted my players to experience the travel, the adventure is like half of the, you know, getting there that is half of the adventure. You know, because I'm like a Tolkien fanatic, and you know, them getting to Mount Doom was most of the story, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that happen along the way. But teleportation spells, they can eliminate 90% of this, right? But people often forget that teleportation spells have a mischance and a mishap chance. Now, the 5e Player's Handbook give very specific ways to which to handle mishaps. In the past, it was left much more in the DM's purview, and I stick with that. So if they, you know, if you only have like a fleeting recognition or a vague understanding of where you're trying to get to, the chance of a mishap is really high, like 40%, you know?
Oh, I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah,
So it's almost not even worth using it.
Well, yeah, and so if you teleport to a location that you've only been told about, or if you try to teleport to a location maybe that you've only ever seen once, it's a fairly high chance at screwing things up. Now that opens the door for a DM's creativity. So in the Player's Handbook, it says a mishap leads to the players all taking damage. I prefer to having them be way off course, and that creates the opportunity for an entirely new kind of side quest or a side adventure of correcting their course. So I've seen DMs. I had a DM of a friend of mine who had the party appear like 20 or 30 feet above a lagoon of water, and they were trying to teleport back with all their treasure, but they rolled a mishap. They appeared above this water, fell into the water, had to ditch all their loot because it weighed too much and swim to shore. And then most of the adventure, the rest of the adventure was them trying to overcome the aquatic beasts that lived in that lagoon, trying to get back all of their loot. So it made for an interesting end to the adventure. But teleportation spells are not the end all be all, for sure.
You also mentioned the idea of, you know, you teleport and then you teleport into a mountain and you take a massive amount of damage because obviously you can't go through the mountain, so you just hit the mountain. Something else that I had thought of is that you could teleport into an unknown village, a poor little remote village where they're just minding their own business. And for some reason, you teleported on top of one of the main huts and you killed their high priestess.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly creates a, you know, for a good aligned party. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about an alignment in a future video, but right. for a heroic party, how about that? For a heroic party, you know, that presents a number of problems, because how do you deal with that situation where you suddenly have this village very upset with you that you've killed somebody very important to them?
Right.
And depending on how primitive that village is, you know, a spiritual leader could be incredibly important, you know. Mm-hmm. So it definitely creates an interesting quandary, and it just creates opportunity for improvisation like you won't believe. But
so to summarize, hex crawls, really good idea. If you want to use them, you can. There's so many online sources where you can create your map and you can number different areas accordingly to figure out a list of random encounters. You can use those random encounters if they're not used into another hex crawl at some other point. Make sure you have pictures of your terrain. Make sure you have playlists for your Spotify account. Be mindful of time. Use your moon charts, your sun charts, especially according to your terrain accordingly. When you want to think about your encounters, think about what would be in a snowy tundra, what would be in that desert area, what would be in a big mountain or volcanic surrounding area. And when your party is going off on these longer adventures, make them think about the tools that they have and the equipment that they have, and have fun with the traveling spells that 5e does grant you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I am a big, like I've said earlier, I'm a big Tolkien fan. So to me, getting there is a big hunk of the adventure. And so, you know, find ways of making travel interesting. And these are just a few. I'm sure there are 1,000 different angles you could take on traveling. But I want to encourage everybody to check out Goodman Games. They are rebooting a number of the old 1E modules. I think the last one they did was the classic Temple of Elemental Evil, which is the first mega dungeon. Yeah, check out Isle of Dread if you're interested in a King Kong Skull Island type adventure. But until then, like, comment, and subscribe. And next time, have another come back and have another round on us.
Clink.
Clink.